It's time now to actually go over to our U.S. correspondent, Nina Maria Potts, who joins us from Washington. Nina, good afternoon, good evening to you. We know that throngs of international media are lapping up the story. Talk to us about how the Zexit has been judged there in Washington.
Well, I think ever since the very close relationship that President Nelson Mandela enjoyed with President Bill Clinton, Americans have always held a deep affection for South Africa, a deep fondness for South Africans. The perception used to be that South Africa was a reliable, heavyweight partner in the region. I think, unfortunately, that President Zuma's tenure has gone a considerable way towards damaging South Africa's reputation here in the US, certainly, but internationally. The automatic assumption is that corruption, the widespread erosion of public trust, the apparent deterioration of the rule of law, that all of those have been long-time contributing factors to the demise of President Zuma. So for weeks, if not months, the speculation here in Washington has been that President Zuma would have to go. I think the only question on people's lips here was how long it would take the ANC and the people of South Africa themselves, how long it would take them to reach the same conclusion.
This issue now, it's been going on for some time. I mean, 2 weeks to be exact. And this side, the blame is put squarely on I suppose, the ANC using kid gloves on President Jacob Zuma. It's an approach that is a general concern this side of the country. Is it the country that is seen as not having an effective legal framework to deal with such?
I think part of that has fueled certainly investor concern and political concern over what happens next. And it's not just about the legal framework, it's also about whether or not South Africa has the ability to hold the president or its president to account. I'll quote the Washington Post this morning, which says, in a direct swipe at President Zuma, that his name has become synonymous with the abuse of public office and personal gain. There is a kind of disbelief, I think, that President Zuma's tenure could have really lasted this long, 9 years. And I think a sense of irony here, certainly among experts who follow South African politics, that the same tactics might be used against President Zuma that were used against President Mbeki. I do think that in retrospect, the overall consensus is that the ANC helped propel President Zuma to power, plays a part in terms of responsibility, the fact that he was welcomed back with open arms, and that we're at this point now. I think there's a real concern that the ANC is seen to be doing what certainly President Zuma's critics would say would be the right thing.
Nina, also, maybe you're familiar with the impeachment process, since the US does have such a system in place. But I understand it's very difficult, as history has proven, to impeach a sitting president, even in the United States. Now, South Africa is only redefining the rules to impeach a president. It's happening currently. They haven't even been approved by Parliament at this stage. Talk to us about the difficulties of an impeachment process.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, as you know, impeachment and the right to impeach is written into the U.S. Constitution. And, I'll quote from Article 2, Section 4 in the U.S. Constitution, which says, "The President, Vice President, all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and the conviction of treason, bribery, other high crimes and misdemeanors." Well, I mean, you've just mentioned that politically it's proven very difficult to remove a president. And I should draw the distinction, certainly here in the United States, between impeachment and removal, which of course are not the same thing. President Clinton was famously impeached by the House but acquitted by the Senate. And of course, many people point to the personal intervention of President Nelson Mandela at the time, who really came to the political rescue of President Bill Clinton at the time. But it is true that impeachment is very much part of the active political conversation here in the United States. There is a highly funded campaign campaign, for example, to try and impeach President Trump, although it's not even very clear sometimes, even in the very protracted and drawn-out conversations about impeachment, what constitutes an impeachable offense. And there is a live academic debate over whether or not President Trump could pardon himself over some of the allegations that he's facing.
Yeah. Are there any pockets or groups in the United States that are in defense of President Jacob Zuma?
Narrowly on President Zuma, it would be very difficult to find any support, I think, still alive. There is certainly a long history of support for the ANC. Americans who were actively involved in the struggle against apartheid. I think, there are pockets of certainly people that follow South African politics of real support for the ANC and everything that the ANC has tried to achieve in South Africa. For President Zuma, I would have to say it would be difficult to find anyone that believes that President Zuma holds the key to South Africa's future at this stage.
I suppose the next question I'm going to ask you, I do know the answer to, but I'll get it from you anyway. Will the removal of President Jacob Zuma affect any relations that South Africa has with Washington? In fact, will this removal have any bearing on our bilateral ties, or may I ask you, do you think it may even strengthen them?
I think at this stage it's hard to see how his removal wouldn't have an entirely positive effect on the US relationship with South Africa. President Zuma had, as you know, a rocky relationship even with President Obama. There are some fundamental differences of opinion when it comes to bilateral issues such as trade, for example. I'm not sure that whoever steps into that space in South Africa would necessarily heal those divisions. As you know, South Africa famously banned US poultry imports. That was definitely part of the trade relationship that went wrong for the United States. I'm not sure that Americans know the names of who might step in after President Zuma may or may not go, but I think definitely that there is political and market anxiety over a slowing economy, unemployment, even the water crisis in Cape Town. I think Americans and certainly Washington insiders feel now is the time for change, and change can only bring a better bilateral relationship.
All right, Nina, let's leave it there for this evening. Thanks very, very much for talking to us on the program. Nina Potts is our US correspondent in Washington, giving us the reaction to the Zexit talks and the recall of President Jacob Zuma.